This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. 2.5 Admins, episode 293. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, your customary Clara article plug, Alan, is 5-year storage design with OpenZFS, media refresh, rebalancing, and hardware independence.
Yeah, so in this one, we talk about how to design a storage system that will actually last 5 years, how to deal with needing to refresh the media, whether that's getting bigger disks or newer disks as they fail and so on, how to rebalance as you grow a pool and to keep optimal performance, and just how you can design a storage system where you don't have to replatform all your data just because you decided you want to move to ARM-based hardware or to a different operating system, or just migrate your existing storage to a newer CPU.
Right, well, link in the show notes as usual. Microsoft recently put up a post on the Windows Insider blog, Our Commitment to Windows Quality. I actually got an email as well with this blog post pretty much verbatim, because at some point I signed up to Windows Insider. I think it was to get access to WSL or something early. But anyway, this post is all about how they're going to make Windows 11 a little bit less shit, essentially. Scaling back the AI, reducing disruption from Windows updates, and a bunch of other stuff, which all actually does sound quite promising if you're a Windows user.
Yeah, although the fact that they led off with their biggest push on this is that you'll be able to move the taskbar to any side of the screen.
Just like you used to be able to do many years ago before they took that away with Windows 11. Yay!
I didn't even realize that they'd taken that away because I always have it at the bottom where it belongs. But I know certain people love to have it on the side. So that must have pissed a lot of people off then.
It did. That was a pretty big deal when Windows 11 dropped. That was one of the changes that people were screaming about pretty freaking loudly. Anybody who liked a top-mounted or side-mounted taskbar got really upset about it. Actually, the taskbar in general was a frequent source of screamy complaints during the Windows 11 debut, because people also didn't like that all the elements inside the taskbar were centered in Windows 11 rather than being left justified and right justified the way they were in Windows 10.
Yeah, I could turn that off. Although the other one is they killed the old quick launch bar, which I, from Windows XP into Windows 10 had made very heavy use of. Having the things I need kind of pinned in there in a different way than the normal pinning to the start bar that was added in what Windows 7 had. And when that was suddenly gone after the reboot from Windows 10 to Windows 11, I was like, the fuck you do that for?
Well, that's why I love XFCE, because it has that classic Windows feel. I've got all my quick launch, my terminal, and my sound settings and everything right down there.
Well, the pinned ones are almost the same. They're just slightly bigger, and so I can't fit quite as many of them or whatever. But the other really telling one is, one of their top things is faster and more dependable File Explorer. It's like, yeah, when did File Explorer become not dependable? Like, you have one job. I want to be able to browse through the folders on my computer. How did you make that worse? I don't think they mentioned it here, but the one where Task Manager can actually fail in Windows 11 is the one that really drove me up the wall. Maybe mostly because I've seen, a bunch of the videos from some old Microsoft engineers who worked on Task Manager talking about how they made sure that even if there was no memory left, you could start Task Manager to kill the thing that was taking all the memory and so on. But just the Task Manager in Windows 11 is just lower quality.
Garbage. It's garbage. Let's be honest here.
Yes.
How did they manage that then? Did they just reserve a bit of memory just for Task Manager?
That kind of thing, just making Task Manager use very little memory, or a lot of the way it would update and redraw the screen was all asynchronous. So if it happened to be slow, it wouldn't freeze Task Manager itself. And the new one is, the new style, and it all looks nice and has a bunch of extra options, but it doesn't always work.
It also hides almost all of the useful data from you unless you click 2 or 3 different things to make it show you the stuff that matters, which drives me nuts.
Yeah, it's just like advanced details all the things instead of only some of the apps. It reminds me of the old, Control-Delete menu in Windows 95 that only listed applications that could be seen, not every application that was running.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's a lot like time travel back to then. Now, I will say, from what I recall, at least in the 95 era, there was a different tab you could go to that would show you processes rather than applications. And by default now, the task manager, it's basically doing the same thing. It's showing you applications. You don't see processes, which also means you don't see services unless you do a whole bunch of clicking to say, no, I'm a grown up and I actually want to see the things I asked you to see, which, like, I don't usually mind having to go into advanced views on things, but it seems really stupid here because by the time you're bringing up a process manager, like, dude, you're already in the weeds. We have left any vague idea that you're just a normal Joe and Jane six-pack user just getting through your day. No, you're monkeying around under the hood at this point, so you should probably be getting a mechanic's view.
Yeah, you want to see all 10 SVC hosts.
Yeah. The other thing that caught me about this, the File Explorer announcement, is our first round of improvements will focus on a quicker launch experience. Yeah, I could use that. It's pretty much a dog to launch these days. I'm going to read this a little out of order because I want to get to the weirdest one last. Smoother navigation. Yep, could use that. More reliable performance. Yep, it frequently I haven't seen File Explorer entirely lock up, but it gets weirdly like hangy and laggy lately. Now, finally, the one that I skipped over along the way, reduced flicker. I don't know about y'all, but I can't really say that any of the issues I've ever had with File Explorer is, oh no, it's flickery on the screen. Like, what the hell does that even mean?
I think it has to do with when things are changing and it's refreshing and a couple other things. And I don't know if it's depending on your level of graphic acceleration, how much you have it, or the fact that I have most of the animations turned off so I don't get the same level of flickering as the default experience.
Well, I mean, when I use Windows, it's almost always the default experience because it's usually going to be running inside a VM or it's, somebody else's desktop that I'm working with in a business environment, which usually means minimal customization or possibly means me yelling at some user about, how unusable they've made their workstation. But I've never seen this flicker thing either. It sounds to me like nonsense. It sounds like they're saying they're going to implement super leap gaming technology and, make sure that we do VSync and your 120 hertz monitors get the perfect experience in File Explorer. And I'm just like, dude, this is not an FPS. I don't need that. You have a lot of things to concentrate on. Maybe take that one off of the short list.
It is interesting, though, that they're looking to remove AI where it's not wanted. I mean, ideally, it would just not be in anything, but they shoehorned it into absolutely everything, including like MS Paint and Notepad and shit. And now they're actually listening to the backlash on that, it seems.
A bit. Integrating AI where it's most meaningful with craft and focus. I mean, that sounds good, but it sounds good in much the same way that like the 50th crappy brewmaster in your town is making IPAs and like what they write about it on their website. Like, you're making India Pale Ales because you can't figure out what the hell you're doing, so you just dump hops in there until nobody can taste your mistakes. That's essentially the same thing that we're saying here. They're not saying the AI is going away, but yes, it's good that they're pulling the AI crap out of Notepad, for example, and snipping tool and photos. Good. Yes, please do take that out. But I don't know, man. That's not enough to get a rousing cheer from me. Because you'll note what they're not saying is we're not going to keep cramming AI into all sorts of places. They're just saying, like, we've identified some places we're going to remove it, and we're going to use more craft and focus when we continue integrating it into things.
Which, if they're being earnest, means we're actually going to make it sure it makes sense or that it's not shoddy before we try to jam it down your throat.
Which we already know not to
Yes,
trust or believe
exactly.
that. Come on. It's hard to take it seriously, the whole like, oh, we're going to reduce all the unnecessary entry points when like still when I look at Office 365 admin panel now, it's like it's not the Office 365 admin panel. You've got to get through Copilot to get to Office 365.
But the other big one, obviously, is the Windows Update experience. They're saying, make it less disruptive. Most devices will only have to reboot once a month, but organizations and users will have the option to reboot faster and get the updates more frequently, but not get the forced reboot as often. and then more direct control over updates, including the ability to pause updates for longer. I think currently after you pause it once or twice, it says, no, you can't put it off any longer. And giving you back the option to shut down or restart without being forced to install updates. So it's like, I need to reboot right now, or I'm shutting down because I'm about to get on an airplane. Now is not the time to start installing that Windows update.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I would just like to point out that Windows is the only modern operating system I know of where anybody's mad about the updates. I mean, as a Linux user, I've got automatic updates running all the time in the background, and there's never a time where I feel like, oh man, I need to make sure that my automatic, apt upgrades can't happen in the background. No, they're fine. They can do what they need to do. They apply the changes they need to apply. There are some of them that won't actually be in place until after a reboot. If you update your graphics driver or, any other kernel module or the kernel itself, you're going to need to reboot to get that. And short of live patch, which again, like we even have options for that, which I don't personally usually bother with. I would prefer to make sure my system reboots, after an update. But just, again, it's hard to get excited about Windows just basically promising, you know what? Sandwiches for lunch, now with 33% less dog shit. Thanks, I guess.
Well, it's funny. 3 days after that post, there's a Register article. Microsoft fixes broken Windows update days after vowing fewer broken updates.
I don't think that anything a reasonable person would have gotten out of that Windows Insider promise to make, the update system better. I don't think any reasonable person would think that that would have caught this particular issue, which is basically just we didn't QA this update hard enough. The Windows Insider post is mostly talking about the mechanism itself getting improved, not Microsoft engineers doing better QA on the fixes themselves as they go out. It might be nice to get a promise about that too, but would we believe it if we got it?
Yeah, this was more, we're going to try to make it less annoying. But I think to Jim's point, comparing to Linux and so on, it's just that why do the updates take so long to install, and why can't they be installed while I'm using the computer? Like, why does it have to wait until I'm rebooting in order to actually do the update and I have to sit there and watch a progress bar? Like, you put the files in place, on the next reboot, you use the new file. Like, I don't know why Windows is still stuck in this Windows 95 era of, oh, we can only change this file while you're not using it, and we can't just put a note in a text file somewhere saying, hey, load version 6 instead of version 5 of this file.
Also, why is Windows Update such a performance hog? Why is it so unreliable to find updates when updates exist? I can't tell you how many times, I've fought with a system trying to get it to notice that there are Windows updates that I actually need it to apply, but you're just sitting there waiting forever at the Windows Update screen for it to hopefully find a fix that may or may not actually show up, even when it's in the catalog. And then when they do get applied, I mean, I've seen brand new systems deploy, and when you start them up, when the Windows Update process fires up in the background and gets that first big glug of updates, I have seen those updates come in at a rate rapidly enough to overwhelm, even a decent like i5 or i7 laptop with a solid state drive, to the point that it's entirely unusable for like 90 freaking minutes while it's downloading and, doing random things on the drive with it. And I'm just like, this isn't necessary. Again, there has literally never been a time that I've like, oh no, my Linux system or my FreeBSD system, or even, God help me, for the most part, a Mac, is unusable while updates are getting applied. Now, I will say with Macs, God help you when it comes to the actual like major operating system upgrades, but just system updates, pretty transparent and reliable.
Yeah, I guess I never really vocalized how annoying it is when like, okay, there are 5 updates. You've downloaded one really slowly for some reason, and now you're installing it. But in the meantime, you're not downloading the other one in the background because we can't do 2 things at once because we only have a single core processor, right?
Well, the worst thing, which was more of a problem before, but is still somewhat of a problem now, is you install a brand new system, you go to Windows Update, it updates like, 30 things, you reboot, and then it finds like another 5. Like, just give me 35 in the first place.
I wouldn't even say that's that much less of a problem than it used to be. That is a constant issue with Windows updates. You must apply the last one before we'll even talk about the next one kind of thing. And
yeah,
I can understand, one update requiring a prior update, but to Alan's prior point, well, then download all the damn things at once. Batch your downloads and, start applying the updates as they're downloaded. And you don't need to download them in order. You need to apply them in order. So download everything and then start working your way through the freaking list.
Yeah, I think some of it is, you don't need the .NET version X security patch for May until you actually have that version of .NET, which you don't get until you're 2 update reboot cycles in. But, that is predictable. They could fix that. I remember back in the day working at a local computer store, we built our own thing where they downloaded the manual.exes of all the Windows updates from Windows XP SP2 for the next 2 years, and just had a batch script that went and installed all of them without rebooting with the flag to say don't reboot, and then rebooted once because it was days faster than using the Windows update to do it.
I have frequently downloaded updates directly from the Windows catalog when Windows Update was just being a dick for some reason and I needed to get something done and get on with my day. It'd be like, okay, I know the KB number that I need. I'm just going to go to the Windows catalog, download that KB standalone and run that because Windows Update just isn't updating. Yay.
Yeah, in this case, we're building multiple PCs every single week. And so we want to have all these downloads local because our internet isn't that fast. And because why download the same file 8 times a week?
Well, I'm sitting here running Ubuntu, or basically Ubuntu 24.04.4, right? I could go and get the 2404 ISO from 2 years ago, install it, and then every single update to bring me to where I am right now would happen in one go. I mean, depending on the speed of my internet and the computer, it might take 20 minutes maybe, but then it would be exactly where I am in one go and one reboot.
Mm-hmm.
And the computer would be eminently usable for that entire estimated 20 minutes it might take.
Yeah.
And honestly, that 20 minutes is pretty generous. I do not find that it takes long at all to get a freshly installed Ubuntu system up to speed, even with vanilla Ubuntu, let alone lighter weight version. The majority of those upgrades are going to be in the desktop environment itself. But even so, it doesn't take that long. Your computer's completely usable while it's happening. Everything happens in one batch and it's done. You'll need to reboot once to apply the new kernel, and that's it.
Yeah, it really makes you grateful for the Linux desktop. All right, we've got another car story. Cyber attack on vehicle breathalyzer company leaves drivers stranded across the US. So this is a thing I only learnt about in Pluribus, the Vince Gilligan show that was, I think, towards the end of last year. In America, you can get court-ordered breathalyzers if you get caught drink driving, where you have to blow into it in order for the engine to start. That's not a thing here, I don't think.
Yeah, it's an ignition interlock.
Yeah.
I was never sure if those were real or not. I'd seen them on various TV shows for years, but it's usually presented as like a comedy thing. Like somebody is such a screw up that to get in their crappy little car and get to their crappy job, they have to blow in the tube first. And usually that doesn't work and more hilarity ensues. And I'm like, is that really a thing? I don't know, because I've never had a DUI personally, so I've never really had that looming over me. But since I started motorcycling, one of my favorite things to do is ride around, at midnight or 1 in the morning and get into all kinds of weird places I wouldn't normally go. And on one of those trips, I found the local Intoxilock dealer in Columbia, South Carolina. I was like, it really is real. Here it is. I could go here to get one if I want it.
Right. Well, anyway, they need to regularly check in with the server to get calibrated. But it turns out that if that server has been attacked and it's offline, then you can't start your car.
Yeah, so it seems like it doesn't go to the cloud for every attempt to start the car, but if it needs a calibration and can't get it, it will refuse to start. And it seems like maybe there's no grace period at all. It's a little unclear, but it definitely seems like one of those things where there should be a failsafe. I understand that to prevent tampering, it couldn't be forever that if it can't talk to the cloud, you can still start your car, but it seems that they really didn't ever consider that the internet is unreliable.
I think they just maybe figured they didn't really have to care.
Probably.
There's not a lot of political consequence to crapping on the heads of people who have a DUI conviction,
Yep.
I mean, the whole Intoxilock thing to begin with is already It's extremely demeaning. It seems like it's going to be very failure prone and just a horrible kludge. Even just when you hear the idea, you're like, oh, that sounds awful. I mean, there's a reason I thought maybe that was just a common comedy routine on TV shows until I found the actual vendor. So yes, it's not a good way to treat customers, but the person with the DUI conviction isn't really the customer. The United States government is. And if the United States government, it's specifically the judicial system, doesn't really care that much if the person with the DUI conviction can get to work without having to call an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi, well, why would the company care all that much?
But it's also just your classic Internet of Shit story, isn't it?
Yeah, except for when you're mandated to have the Internet of Shit device rather than you bought it yourself.
Yeah. But, thermostats failing because they can't talk to the server, or the server gets turned off and suddenly you can't control the heating in your home. It's all along those kind of lines, isn't it? It's putting a dependence on a network connection that really oughtn't to be there.
Yes, although in the case of Intoxilock, it's not an easily solvable problem, and the network dependency is probably better than the other option, which would be having to bring the actual vehicle into a service station to be calibrated routinely. Because you're going to need a certain population size to support something like that, which means that rural people getting a DUI would really be screwed over pretty hard if they had to potentially drive 90 miles every few weeks one way just to get their Intoxilock recalibrated versus it happening over the internet, which seemed like a godsend, I'm sure, until Intoxilock came under cyber attack severe enough that their servers were offline for long enough that these calibrations stopped happening and the vehicle started saying, you know what? Nope, not going to start. You haven't calibrated me. Go to hell.
Yeah, and it probably goes to show that the DR strategy at Intoxilock is not robust enough that they can't get the service back online within a couple of days.
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to 2.5admins.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to send in your questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Scott writes, I have an HP microserver that is getting long in the tooth from about 2013, and I want to build something new. My wife is a photographer, so our storage needs increase at a rate around 2 to 3 terabytes per year. I have a 2-disc wide mirror that also gets backed up off-site. I use the other 2 drive slots for single disks, one for the OS and one for something else. On the new setup, I want to run an OS with a hypervisor so I can virtualize the NAS, even my router, and more. Is this crazy? Will ZFS TrueNAS be okay in a virtualized environment like this? What hardware should I consider? Note that I'll have an old Netgear router around as a backup if my virtual router starts having issues.
Well, there are a couple of things here. And one is that I really don't generally recommend running a router as a virtual machine. Can you do it? Yes. Is it something that's usually a great idea? In my experience and opinion, probably not. You don't typically need the advantages that a virtualized environment can bring so much for a router environment. That's usually a very simple, straightforward, easy to back up kind of a system. And you don't really want to layer additional complications on top of it to have more reasons that your ability to access the internet might not be working, because it's harder to troubleshoot things when you can't get to the internet. So usually you really kind of want your router pretty simple and straightforward.
Yeah, there's also the bootstrapping problem there of what order do you start all your VMs in and so on if the router has to go first? And how do you make that, especially, is there anything on the hypervisor host that needs the internet to be able to boot properly, even if it's just to sync the clock? And you can have really interesting issues when something needs the internet to be able to start, but that something has to start before your router can start.
Not that you're probably rebooting a hypervisor that frequently anyway, but you really don't want your internet access to go down every time you need to reboot any given machine, particularly in a home lab environment where reboots tend to be more frequent and unscheduled than they might be in like a work production environment. The other issue is I really would not ever recommend running TrueNAS as a VM. TrueNAS really should be run on the bare metal if you're going to run it at all. Basically, TrueNAS could be your hypervisor operating system that most of your things are running beneath. That's something that people do pretty frequently, actually, including even running their router as a VM beneath TrueNAS, which, again, I still don't recommend for all the reasons that we already mentioned. You also, generally speaking, you don't typically want to nest ZFS. You can run ZFS in a VM beneath a ZFS data store. Like, that does work. There's nothing unsafe about it. But you can introduce some kind of odd performance issues if you don't really understand the tuning from top to bottom. So it's just usually not worth it. If you want to run something along the lines of a NAS distribution underneath ZFS already, or you've got ZFS in the stack before you even get to the NAS, I usually recommend letting that NAS distribution run something that's not ZFS instead, because you only need the ZFS once for safety. ZFSing twice doesn't make things any safer.
ZFS really does better when it can talk to the disk directly and see what's happening. If you're doing a normal VM, you're giving TrueNAS one disk. So what's ZFS going to do for redundancy and so on? It's not going to be able to help there. And if you're making a whole bunch of different virtual disks, you're just causing all kinds of weirdness and performance problems. So I wouldn't recommend that. As Jim said, TrueNAS Scale does have options to run VMs. If you're only looking at doing a couple and you're not standing them up and spinning them down all the time, then for running a router and one other thing or something as VMs under TrueNAS, that is an option. But yeah, I would not recommend running your NAS, but especially TrueNAS, as a VM, partly because you're just not going to be able to give it the raw disks, and it doesn't provide a lot of value without that.
Now, if you are in the market potentially to spin up just a general purpose operating system distribution with ZFS and run your VMs beneath it, using generic tools, rather than going to very purpose-built application distros like TrueNAS or Proxmox, I absolutely support the crap out of that. I think that's a great way to go. I think a lot of folks don't realize that by the time you learn all the intricacies of a TrueNAS or a Proxmox interface, you could have spent roughly the same amount of effort learning the way the services actually work, which isn't what you did when you learned the intricacies of some, higher order interface rather than the actual services. So if that's something you want to do, I absolutely support that. But if you do want to run TrueNAS and you do want to run Proxmox, both of them really should be run directly on bare metal.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send any questions or your feedback. You can find me at joelrest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And I'm at Alan Jude.
We'll see you next week.